Hello and welcome. I've just been waiting for people to come online and I'm going to begin because there will be people that will watch this on replay. So thank you for everyone who's going to show up and watch this. How to stop imposter syndrome and a lack of confidence from holding you back in 2022. And this topic, imposter syndrome and the confidence, is something that I see time and time again with my clients, people that I coach, people that attend my workshops, my webinars, that comment on my articles. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Carol Stewart. I'm an executive career leadership coach, and I specialise in coaching introverted women who are senior leaders. And imposter syndrome is something that I see time and time again. A year ago, I set up my confidence, influence, and impact assessment on my website. And it's an assessment for introverted women who are senior leaders. And in the past year, I've had 1,000 people complete it. And over 80% of them say that they experience imposter syndrome and confidence issues. And I think that this situation is so widespread that I think it's time we just had an open and honest discussion about it so that we can minimize the impact that it has. Hi, Janice. Hi, Rachel. Thank you for joining. And research shows that about 70% of people experience it at some time. And this includes men, it includes people who are extroverted as well. And because it's such a widely held experience, that many people think that they're the only ones that are going through it. And when you think that you're the only one that is going through something, it can be easy to magnify it and extort it, and so that it has that debilitating effect on you. But what I want to talk today is about normalizing it and knocking it on its head so that it doesn't have that impact that it does, that devastating impact that it has on many people. And I've experienced imposter syndrome, and I will likely experience imposter syndrome again. And there are two significant occasions that I can recall where I experienced imposter syndrome. And the first one was when I was in my previous role. So prior to starting my coaching business 10 years ago, I was a leader. I started off in a very junior role, worked my way up to a senior leader. And I experienced imposter syndrome. At the time, I didn't really realize what it was that was going on for me. I remember that I'd got promoted to that role, my last role as a senior leader, in a very short space of time. And I'd gone into this big role, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, they're going to realize they've made a mistake. And there were a couple of things that I was really struggling with. And I kept thinking, expecting to get a phone call or an email to say, look, Carol, we're really sorry, but we made a mistake. We shouldn't have promoted you. But because I'm quite self-aware and I've done a lot of work on my self-development over the years, even back then, I recognized that I was self-sabotaging. And I said to myself, okay, well, what is really going on for me here? And I sat down and I went through my job description and I looked at, well, what was it that I was struggling with? And there were just two particular things that I was struggling with. My job description had a very wide remit. And once I had pinpointed what it was I was struggling with, I was able to get the necessary support to bring me up to speed. So I felt more confident about what I needed to deliver on. Hi, Julia, and hello, LinkedIn user. And as a result of doing that, I felt so much more confident to be able to do my role. And then fast forward another, let me see how many years, another 9 years, 8 years, 9 years, when I wrote my book, Quietly Visible. I'd sent off the manuscript to the publishers, and then imposter syndrome reared its head. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, people are going to think, oh, does she think she is writing a book about this topic? And, who does she think she is? And again, because of my self-awareness, I recognized that I was self-sabotaging. I was trying to convince myself that my writing wasn't good enough, that people would think, oh, who does she think she is writing about this topic? And I had to check myself and remind myself that, you know, I had been writing for a number of years now since I'd started my business. I got great attention with my writing. I did a lot of my writing. The book was based on my experience, my research, people that I had coached. And so I knew that it was going to add value. But if I'd let myself, I would have talked myself out of publishing that book because of imposter syndrome. And so now I recognize that, you know, the next big challenge that I go on, or the next big thing that I take on, imposter syndrome is likely to rear its head again. And that is something that we need to recognize, is that imposter syndrome is not necessarily something that we get over. It's something that we can manage, and we can live with it. And by normalizing it, it takes away the stigma that is associated with it. It takes away the pressure that we put ourselves. So I'm suggesting that we flip it on its head, and rather than it being something that we dread, we normalize it and view it as a normal part of our lived experience. But the thing is, you'll need to be intentional and deliberate about this, because it is so easy to slip back into old unhelpful habits and ways of being. And so if you don't give yourself that space to have that awareness when you are self-sabotaging, when you are doubting yourself, then you will just believe those thoughts, those negative thoughts that are going on in your mind. And what we feed our mind grows. Whatever you focus on and give attention to is going to grow in your mind. So when you talk negatively to yourself about experiencing imposter syndrome, and you beat yourself up and tell yourself that you're not good enough, or that people will realize that you're not good enough, it can create that worry and anxiety. And that worry and anxiety gets in the way of you being all that you can be, and you being your best self. And when you may try and push the thought away, you may try and suppress the thought, but it keeps coming back. And the thought and thinking about it is not the problem. What is the problem is how you respond to it, how we respond to imposter syndrome, how we respond to those negative self-limiting thoughts and beliefs is the problem. So we can have those thoughts, and we can either let them debilitate us, or we can accept them, acknowledge them, and just recognize, well, that's part of life. You know, in life we go through good things, we go through bad things, but how we respond to them determines how we get through them. And how many of you can drive a car or ride a bike? And just type in the comments, yes, if you can ride a car or you can ride a bike. So if you can drive a car or you can ride a bike. I'm sure that the majority of you can probably do one or the other. Some of you may be able to do both. And I'm sure when you first got into that car, or you first got onto a bike, you didn't just take off straight away, zooming down the road. When you probably stalled the car a few times, you probably fell off the bike a few times, but you picked yourself back up and you carried on, because you knew what your goal was. And I've got one person who said no to both. Well, in your case, I would say then that something that you have done, which you couldn't do, but you just picked yourself up and you carried on, and you were intentional about it. So using the examples of the car and the bike, you were intentional about learning to drive the car, learning to ride the bike. Anytime you stumbled, you picked yourself up because you had a purpose, you had a goal in mind that you wanted to achieve. And through deliberate practice and being intentional about it, you were able to master it. And so, yes, you may not be the perfect car driver. You may not be the Lewis Hamiltons of this world, or you may not be able to cycle effortlessly and streamlessly, but you get on and you do it because you know that it helps you to get to a particular destination. It helps you to achieve a particular purpose. And that's how I want you to view imposter syndrome. So acknowledging it and accepting that it is something that you experience. It's something that you can either try and suppress. Those thoughts and those feelings and those emotions arise when you're in a situation that you are doubting yourself. You can either fight them and suppress them and become more and more anxious in the process, which adds to the stress, which adds to the pressure that you put on yourself, which affects your confidence. Or you can, like when you were learning to ride your bike or drive your car, you knew that it was an ongoing journey to get to achieve that goal. And you had that purpose in mind that kept you going, even though you may have got into the car and been stuck in rush hour traffic and big lorry. I remember when I was learning to drive, and one time that I was in the car, I didn't like when the big lorries came past me when we were stuck in traffic. And I remember my driving instructor, one of the driving instructors that I had, would tell me off, and that would make me really anxious. But because I knew that I was determined that I wanted to pass that test, I continued. I didn't stop learning to drive. I continued. And so when you know that you are working towards something and you have a purpose, you're working towards it, it then makes it easier to pick yourself up when you get those strong emotions that are telling you that you're not good enough. And too often we try to fight the emotion and suppress the thought and label ourselves as not being good enough because we doubt ourselves, we lack the confidence, or whatever it is. And then we often tell ourselves that if I was good enough, I wouldn't be feeling like this. And the more you try to control that feeling of anxiety and beat yourself up for feeling it, the worse that it can get. And the more you try to suppress it, it will keep rearing its head. And instead, as I've said, acknowledge the thought and accept that this is how you feel. And pay attention to the reason why you do what you do. So using the car and the bike analogy, you carried on when you kept stalling the car. You carried on when you kept falling off the bike because you had a purpose and you were working towards something which was meaningful to you. And I want you to think about that in the same way when you think of those situations where you experience imposter syndrome and where you doubt yourself. So that, for example, it might be that in your work, your desire is to make a difference. And holding on to that and knowing that you're working towards something which is something significant to you and means what is significant to me will be different to you, and something that's intrinsically motivating. And when you approach it from that perspective, you can get excited about it and curious about it, rather than the self-doubt and the fear which causes you to beat yourself up and hold yourself back. I've got a comment here from Carolyn that most likely it relates to childhood experiences. And yes, imposter syndrome does relate to childhood experiences. And the initial researchers that coined the phrase, and they called it imposter phenomenon, they identified two situations where it was likely to rear its head. And that was where a child was made to feel that they were not good enough, or a situation where they were put on a pedestal and labeled the golden child. It might have been that they were the first in their cohort to start walking, or it might be that they were quite bright. And so then their parents or carers had a high expectation of them and put them on this pedestal, which they felt that they couldn't live up to. And again, what I would say with regards to your early experiences that have helped to shape how you feel about yourself when you're in certain situations, is to recognize that whatever it is that you went through, well, yes, it has played a part in who you are and your experience. However, that is not serving you. Holding on to that is not serving you anymore. It may have helped you over the years as a form of protection against your fears or against certain people, but it's not serving you anymore. And so by holding on to that and thinking and worrying about that, you're just making yourself more anxious, and it's affecting you and affecting your confidence as well. I've got another question. Are minorities or marginalized groups more likely to experience imposter syndrome? And yes, the research does show that they are. When you are in the minority to the dominant group, you're more likely to experience it than those who are in the majority. And I'll give you an example. I often have clients for whom English is not their first language, and they may be in very senior positions, in board meetings, and thinking that they're not as good as everybody else because they may have an accent or English is not their first language, and as a result, their imposter syndrome rears its head. But what I often do is get them to look at themselves and their achievements and their experience and what they're bringing to the table. And invariably, when they look at all that they have accomplished, the fact that they have achieved so much, they can speak multi-languages, they're multilingual, that helps them to put things into perspective. And so, as I said, pay attention to the reason why you do what you do. So, what is what are your values? What are those guiding principles for what you do, why you do? And so, focusing on that and wanting to make a difference can help you when you're in those situations. So, one of my clients was a member of the C-suite, and she found it challenging when people spoke over her in board meetings. And she found it hard to sort of speak up and over them. She was introverted, and when there was sort of more domineering personality, she found it quite challenging. But yet she would be out and about and see somebody on a train, for example, who was being taken advantage of, and she would stand up to them and defend them. And so, it could be somebody who was a lot bigger than her. She would stand up to the person who was picking on that person. And the reason for this was because justice is something that is a core value of hers, and she hates to see when someone is treated unfairly. And so that, because of that, that gives her that drive to stand up for somebody. And so by helping her to see, well, what are her values and what are her driving factors and why she does what she wants to do, that helped her when the imposter syndrome reared its head and she was thinking, oh, she's not good enough, they're going to realize she's not good enough. By focusing on her desire to make a difference, because she knew that she could make a difference, she knew that her experience, her ideas could make a difference, and focusing on that helped to alleviate those feelings of anxiety that she experienced. So what about you? What is it that you do that drives you in your work? What is it that you do which is that gives your work significance and meaning? And remind yourself of your past achievements. You've been through a lot to get to where you are. I'm sure you've had many examples, situations where you have overcome obstacles, you've overcome challenges, and you have lived to tell the tale. And not only that, don't just focus on the successes and the achievements. Look at the things that you have had to overcome, the challenges that you've had to overcome. None of us goes through life and it's plain sailing. Well, I've never met anybody that does. Life is full of ups and downs. And if it was plain sailing, we would lack resilience and the character that is shaped in getting through those challenges of life. And so recognizing that is part of life, that you have been through experiences where you've doubted yourself, where you've maybe beat yourself up and you've got it, that life has thrown curveballs at you in the past, but you've got through them. Helps to put things into perspective when you're in a situation where imposter syndrome is rearing its head. And another thing is giving yourself the headspace to be present and to self reflect. We often crash through life, we become so busy with work and life that we don't often stop to think about what we're thinking about. And just because we think something doesn't mean to say that it is true or that it is rational or that it is helpful. And so oftentimes what happens is these thoughts that you have, these imposter thoughts, these beliefs that you have, which aren't serving you, which aren't helping you, you're going through the busyness of life and work, and you're not really examining them to see how helpful they are or how real they are. And they come in and you're just believing them and you're accepting them. But as I've said, you can choose how you respond to them. You can choose to accept them or to not let them debilitate you, or you can choose to let them hold you back. I've got a comment here. Carolyn is saying, would you say it's more prevalent than we probably think? Yes, Carolyn, I would. I don't know if you were here from the beginning, but at the beginning I was saying I've had 1,000 people complete my confidence, influence, and impact assessment over the past year. Over 80% of those experience imposter syndrome and confidence issues. The research shows that 70% of people experience it at some time, and it's not just women, men experience it too. Introverts experience it, extroverts experience it, and that is why I'm suggesting that rather than we don't talk about it, we have more conversations about it so that we can take away the stigma around it, so that we can normalize it rather than we fear it, and rather than when we're looking at it in isolation, we're thinking it's just us. And as a result of that, it's getting in the way of what we need to do. It's holding us back. Then I've got another comment here. Let me read what is saying. Feeling like the odd one out and overcoming that can give you a level of empathy and ability to connect to a depth that others will never be able to achieve. A poem is never finished, it is only abandoned. Thank you for that. Another comment. It is something that bonobos chimps do too. Females group together to stand up to over dominant males, especially driven by injustice. Thank you, Zach. When you get mistaken as a cleaner or security when attending corporate events by other guests, it doesn't help. And yes, that does happen. And that is because of the bias that some people have about certain groups of people. And so it's about not letting that, what people say or those assumptions that people make, have that hold on you. And as I said, recognizing those thoughts for what they are. And so as I'm talking about giving yourself the headspace so that you can self-reflect and examine your thoughts to see what is real, what is helpful, and what is holding you back. And so that you can, rather than just go through life, go through your work, just letting these thoughts take a hold of you, giving yourself that space to be present and in the here and now. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to put some time in your calendar, whether it's daily, whether it's weekly, just to give yourself that space where you're uninterrupted thinking space so that you can like have a clear out of the unhelpful thoughts, to clear your thoughts, to clean your thoughts, as I should say. Because that's something that will reap dividends, help you to see how your thought life can be hindering you and getting in the way of you becoming who you know that you are capable of being. So remember that you are a unique individual with your own strengths and weaknesses. You have things that you are good at, things that you're not good at, just like everybody else. And you have something to contribute, which is your uniqueness, and you have that uniqueness to bring to what it is that you do. And because we've held these thoughts and beliefs for so long, it can take time to reframe them in this way. But just like you brush your teeth every day, what I'm suggesting is that you check your mind every day to make sure that those thoughts are helping you rather than hindering you. And it's something that if you know that you've experienced this for a long time, that it's something that's plagued you throughout your career, it's recognizing that it's not going to change overnight, or you may never overcome imposter syndrome, but what you can do is manage the impact that it has on you. You can manage the debilitating effect that it has on you. And so that is what my challenge to you is for 2022, is to change the way that you view imposter syndrome. So rather than looking at it in isolation as it's just you that is going through this experience and magnifying it and letting it stop you from being all that you can be, normalize it, accept that it is a part of life. It is something that you will experience, you may experience as you go on to your next big challenge. And research shows that high achievers, people who are high achieving, experience it. So you know that it's something that is likely to come. And if you know that it's something that is likely to come, it then makes it easier for you to manage it and to deal with it. Let me see if there's any more comments. Yes, I've got a comment here. I'm thinking we can help others by validating their comments in meetings and confirming them. Yes, that can. Yes. Thank you for that. Another comment. I support social housing residents to have their voice heard, and sometimes they do say that speaking up about issues they care about when at a table full of professionals is daunting. And yes, because they are, and it's something that I see a lot where I work with clients who maybe are from a disadvantaged socioeconomic group, and they're in a profession which is full of people who come from a privileged background. And again, as I mentioned about when you're in the minority to the dominant group, it's more likely to rear its head. And those feelings of, oh, I'm not as good as them, or they're much better than me, can make somebody feel insecure. Or what I would suggest in those situations is, and another analogy that I often use is that, there are many routes to get to a destination, and for somebody, and using an example of socioeconomic privilege, someone who's in a position of socioeconomic privilege, they may have had an easy route to get to where they're going. Somebody who is from a disadvantaged socioeconomic background may have had to take a more scenic route. Their route may have been full of challenges and obstacles, but they've reached that same destination. And it's recognizing that even though you may have gone on a more difficult route, you are still at that destination, and you have a valuable contribution to make. So do remember that. So thank you everybody for attending. I will stay on and take questions. And remember, it's something to work on a regular basis, is to check what is going on in your mind and your thoughts. And remember, just because you think something, it doesn't mean that you have to believe it if it isn't true, if it's not helpful. And if you want my support to help you increase your confidence, influence, and impact in 2022, then go to my website, aboundingsolutions.com, and schedule a call with me. Alternatively, Unleash Your Leadership Potential is my self-study online program with ongoing support that will be available from the end of this week. And as a gift to you for Christmas, I'm offering a whopping 70% discount before the end of the year. If you're interested and want me to send you the code to get the discount, let me know in the comments or send me a private message, and I'll send you the code when it's comes out online on Friday. And so my final words, remember that you are a unique individual, as I've said, and you have something of value to contribute. Any questions? I'll stay on for a few minutes if anybody has any questions. Just going through to see whether I've missed any comments. Right. So I will say thank you and goodbye. I'm just checking through the comments to see if I've missed anything. Thank you, Carolyn. Merry Christmas to you too. Okay, well, thank you. And I will see you in 2022. This is my last LinkedIn Live for the year, and I will see you in 2022. Have a good Christmas break and all the best for 2022. Bye.